the children couldn't be still alive. It didn't seem possible.
On June 23, 2018, 12 boys from the Wild Boar soccer team and their coach entered the Tham Luang cave in the Chiang Rai province of Thailand on what they thought was going to be a short excursion. But a sudden rainstorm flooded the tunnels and trapped them deep inside. Thai authorities launched a massive search and rescue mission consisting of over 5,000 people from more than 15 countries. Among this group was a volunteer team of specialized cave divers, and their determination and expertise would be critical to getting the boys out alive. This is the story of the Tham Luang cave rescue and the divers who helped pull it off.
I've seen chaos, but not of this scale.
By the time British cave divers Rick Stanton and John Valanthan arrived in Thailand, the boys had been trapped in the Tham Luang cave for more than 3 days. A team of Thai Navy SEALs was already on the scene and had made some progress into the cave despite having no previous cave diving experience. But the rising waters and strengthening currents had forced them to pull out. Despite the fact that they had been requested by the Thai government and that efforts to reach the boys had stalled, the British divers found their way into the cave blocked by the SEALs.
No, we're meant to go in.
The men simply didn't look the part. Compared to the SEALs and the American military personnel who were assisting the Thais, these British divers looked old. Stanton was in his late 50s and Valanthan in his late 40s. They looked less like rescue divers and more like a retired fireman and an IT consultant, which they were. But despite appearances, these men were among the best cave divers in the world. Both had decades of experience and had been involved in cave rescues before. Stanton alone had pulled no less than 9 people from flooded caves over the years, some living and some not.
I think we both felt that we were best placed to certainly add expertise and try and give the boys the best possible chance of survival.
The British divers were finally given permission to enter the cave, but only after they were warned that if they died in the cave, the SEALs would not go in to recover their bodies. Stanton and Valanthan then moved past the soldiers and pump workers and began their first dive, laying the line that would be their guide through the tunnels in the days ahead. The following day, the British divers discovered 4 pump workers stranded on a ledge just past the first flooded chamber. These men had apparently laid down for a nap the day before and awoke to find themselves trapped by the rising water. Stanton and Valanthan realized that these men would have to be rescued before they could continue their search for the boys. So after a brief dive lesson, they began to swim each man out individually. And although it was a relatively short dive, the pump workers' lack of diving experience caused Stanton to describe the situation as half wrestling match, half rescue swim. It was an ordeal that would inform rescue decisions later in the operation.
You're not a panicker, are you?
I'm not a panicker, no. What gave you that idea?
Now, rain continued to fall and conditions worsened. Very little progress was made by the divers, and as the days dragged on, hope of finding the boys alive began to fade. Things grew so bleak that, according to the National Geographic documentary The Rescue, the men even reached out to the British consulate to inquire about flights home. But a break in the rain and the success of pumping operations finally allowed the rescue team to set up a forward operating base deeper in the cave in what would become known as Chamber 3. Then, on July 2nd, 10 days after the boys had become trapped, Stanton and Valanthan felt the conditions were good enough to make a push deep into the cave. The hope was that the team had found shelter on a raised portion of ground known as Pattaya Beach, but when the divers arrived in the chamber, they found it empty. The men were now more than 2 miles into the cave and running close to the safety margins on their air. Nonetheless, they decided to push on a little further, and when they surfaced in the next chamber, they were met with an incredible surprise. It was a moment they captured on video, and one that would be celebrated around the world.
We are coming. It's okay. It's okay. Many people are coming. Many people. We are the first.
But the excitement of finding the boys alive was quickly followed with the sober question of how they were going to get them out. Now, one option was to locate a chimney into the cave that would let rescuers get closer to the boys' location and perhaps allow them to avoid the flooded portions. The search for such an opening had begun from almost day one, and nothing had been found. Another idea, and the one that seemed to have the strongest backing of Thai officials, was simply to leave the boys where they were until the end of monsoon season. On the surface, this seemed like the safest bet. If they could supply the boys with enough food, they could simply wait out the rains and walk out once the flooding had subsided. There were, however, several problems with this plan. The first was that this was only the start of monsoon season, and the pump system helping stem the water levels could easily fail. And even if the chamber the boys were sheltering in didn't flood, extensive flooding elsewhere in the cave could once again cut the boys off from outside help. They would need to find a way to store more than 1,800 meals, and the biological waste from 13 boys could contaminate the chamber. In such conditions, the boys could fall sick, and something as small as a cut could become lethal. Perhaps most pressing of all, though, was the fact that the oxygen level in the chamber had already fallen to 15%, well below the 19.5% that is considered a minimum threshold of safety. So the only remaining option, and the one the cave divers began to push for, was to dive the boys out of the cave. But even this plan was fraught with risk. For one, none of the boys had any diving experience. Some of them didn't even know how to swim. And Stanton and Valanthan knew from their recent experience rescuing the 4 pump workers that expecting these young boys to stay calm and placid while swimming through long, narrow passageways and breathing through a regulator could be disastrous. They would have to find a way to keep them calm. And so Stanton reached out to Richard Harris, an Australian cave diver and anesthesiologist, to see if it was possible to anesthetize the boys for the rescue. When he first heard the idea, Harris was adamantly against it. He was convinced the boys would die if this was attempted, but as the discussions between Harris and the team in Thailand continued, Harris began to realize that the boys might have no other option. Harris flew out with another Australian, cave diver Craig Challen, and after diving into the cave to meet the boys, he got on board with the idea.
Despite Harry's skepticism, I became more and more convinced this was the only way.
In the meantime, preparations were being made to bring the boys out, and supplies were being taken deep into the cave. And it was during one of these dives with supplies that the rescue took a dark turn. A Thai Navy SEAL named Saman Kunan, who had come out of retirement for the sole purpose of rescuing the missing boys, drowned while transporting supplies through one of the flooded passageways. He was 38. After Kunan's death, the leader of the SEALs decided that his men would no longer make dives past Chamber 3. If the boys were to be brought out, it would be up to the volunteer cave divers to make it happen. And so Stanton, Valanthan, Harris, Challen, and the rest of the team began to finalize their plans to bring the boys out. British divers Jason Mallison and Chris Jewell would fly out to help on July 4th. But even in its final form, this rescue plan was impossibly risky. Simply put, the plan was for the boys to be drugged into unconsciousness, fitted with full-face breathing masks, and swum out one by one through the narrow, current-swept passageways. Each diver would be responsible for monitoring the boy they were transporting and would need to re-administer the anesthesia drugs en route. Each dose would only last for about 40 minutes, and the trip would take an hour and a half or more. There were 100 ways this plan could go wrong. If too much of the drug was administered, the boy could die. If his face mask came off as he brushed a wall, he could die. If he woke up and panicked in the water, he could die. The list goes on. In fact, according to National Geographic, Harris himself said of the plan, "I expected the first 2 kids to drown and then we'd have to do something different. I put their odds of survival at 0. The plan was still facing great resistance from some in the Thai government, and on top of the obvious risk to their lives and the lives of the boys, the divers found that they might be risking their freedom as well. In the documentary The Rescue, Harris says he was warned that if the boys died during the dive, public sentiment could turn against the divers and the men could end up in the Thai judicial system, where the penalties could be pretty harsh.
There was an extraction plan in place to put us in a van, drive us cross-country on back roads to the embassy compound.
Nevertheless, despite the danger, the divers continued to push for the operation to go ahead, and on July 8th, the 15th day of the rescue, the plan was given the green light. And at 10 a.m., 13 divers and 5 Thai Navy SEALs entered the cave to begin the extraction. The boys would be brought out one by one. The boys themselves had chosen the order of their exit, with the boy who lived furthest from the cave set to go first, and the boy who lived nearest last. The boys may have believed that they would still need to ride their bikes home and wanted to ensure that they would all get home around the same time. The first boy was put into a wetsuit, fitted with a mask, and drugged. Once he was unconscious, his feet were bound and his hands were tied behind his back so that if he awoke, he couldn't fight with the diver. The boy was then pulled underwater to begin the swim to safety. Now, Mallison was chosen to take the first boy, and he began the long, slow journey out of the cave. Some portions of the route were so narrow that he actually had to push the boy ahead of him in order to make it through. The nearly 2.5-mile long journey would take several hours. Each boy was assessed at different points on the route by support divers before finally making it all the way to Chamber 3, where a team of medical personnel were waiting. The final journey to the entrance would take several hours more and would involve more than 200 volunteers using stretchers and pulleys. The first boy made it out of the cave on Sunday evening, and astonishingly, he was alive. An ambulance would take him to a waiting helicopter for transport to a nearby hospital. 3 more boys would emerge from the cave that day, all alive and well.
I surfaced in Chamber 3 with my child. Relief.
The rescue would continue for 2 more days before all 12 boys, their coach, and the 4 remaining Navy SEALs would exit the cave. They had all made it out alive. Ironically, very shortly after the last seal made it back to Chamber 3, water began to rush into the cave. Apparently, part of the pump system had failed, and it was not long before the cave became inaccessible. The cave would remain flooded for more than 6 months. The team had made it out not a moment too soon.
Can you see that what you did was fairly remarkable?
I can see it was a first. How's that?
The Thai Navy SEALs summed up the rescue best when they wrote on Facebook, "We're not sure if this is a miracle, a science, or what. All 13 wild boars are now out of the cave." All 12 members of the wild boars and their coach would make full recoveries. The boys would travel to several parts of the world to tell their story, including an appearance on The Ellen Show. The cave divers, the Thai SEALs, and the thousands more who participated in the miraculous rescue would return to their normal lives, but the world would not soon forget them. The Australian divers Richard Harris and Craig Challen would be awarded the Star of Courage, as well as the Medal of Order of Australia. And in 2019, both men would be named Australian of the Year by the Australian government. British divers Jason Mallison and Chris Jewell, who joined the rescue effort in its final stages and helped swim several of the boys to safety, would be awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal by Queen Elizabeth II. Mallison would also receive an honorary doctorate from the University of Huddersfield. Rick Stanton wrote a book about his experiences titled Aquanaut and is now an in-demand public speaker. He was awarded the George Medal by Queen Elizabeth II alongside John Philanthon and was given an honorary degree from the University of Bristol. John Philanthon also wrote a book about his experience in the rescue called 13 Lessons That Saved 13 Lives. Like Stanton, Philanthon was awarded the George Medal by Queen Elizabeth II and given an honorary degree from the University of Bristol. Philanthon, a Cub leader with the Scout Association, was awarded that organization's highest honor, the Bronze Cross. Philanthon continues to work as an IT consultant and is also an in-demand public speaker. Philanthon, Stanton, Harris, Jewell, and Mallison were also the first ever recipients of the Medal of Valor from the US-based Professional Association of Diving Instructors. Siman Kunan, the Thai Navy SEAL who lost his life in the rescue, was posthumously promoted to Lieutenant Commander and was awarded the Knight Grand Cross of the Most Exalted Order of the White Elephant by the King of Thailand. A bronze statue of Kunan, with 13 boars at his feet representing the soccer team and their coach, was installed outside the Tham Luang cave where it can be seen by visitors. And in a sad coda to the rescue, another Thai Navy SEAL, Beirut Pakbara, lost his life in December of 2019 after battling a blood infection he had picked up during his efforts in the operation more than a year before.